David Keem here, Director of the Midwest Academy. We're bringing some videos to you while the Academy is shut down for the coronavirus. If you were part of Midwest Academy or Colorado Academy, then you're already going to be somewhat familiar with some of the material here. If you're new to our channel or if you're new to our schools, then this will be giving you an idea of what we do here. Assisting me today is my wife Maggie and my son Nico.
Hello.
And what we're going to talk about today is the single Sinwali drill or the Toppy drill. We're going to think about it in terms of strategy today as opposed to just the drill patterns. So these drills were developed basically to fight on the battlefield, and as such, the use of a contact weapon, a stick or a blade, was the technology of the day, and it was the most efficient way of doing battle. Some people have that misconception that empty-hand martial arts came first and weapons came second, but actually human innovation drove people to fight with contact implements first, and then if they weren't able to have those implements, empty-hand arts developed from that. So that being said, the basic strategy in a contact tool is to do the most damage you can as quickly as you can. So the best place to hit somebody was the head. It ends the fight the quickest. The problem was that everybody who had the same knowledge and technology of the day knew to protect their head. And so therein you enter the Toppy strategy, which was to get the opponent to drop their guard or leave themselves open for a headshot, which is why the base level, the low strikes pull back with control strikes, and the high strikes follow through. They're your power shots. So we're going to go through and we're going to demonstrate some levels of timing on these drills and with the strategy that goes with those timings. You want to introduce your drill?
Hey guys, today we're going to be doing the single Sinwali.
So that demonstration is pretty typical of how Toppy or single Sinwali is done. Usually it's done with people moving very quickly and a lot of clashing of the sticks, and people think it's a lot of fun to do that way, but they don't really have a good understanding of why it is they're doing what they are doing. And if you don't have an understanding of why you're doing what you're doing, then maybe the how and the when aren't quite as locked in as they should be. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the why so that we can kind of polish up the how and the when. So as we discussed, the whole idea was basically if I had a weapon, I wanted to use the implement against an opponent's head or neck area to cause the most amount of damage as I could, as quickly as I could, to end the fight as quickly as possible, because unlike the way we contextualize MMA today, these fights were not conducted over a 25-minute period, right? These fights were needed to be done decisively and quickly because you were often fighting multiple opponents, multiple armed opponents, asymmetric environments, things of that nature. So the idea was, if I could protect my head and take my opponent's head out, I was probably going to win. So, as we mentioned before, the whole idea of Toppy was a strategy of getting my opponent to drop their guard. Now, there's a couple things that we have to talk about at the beginning of this. Well, let's talk about stages of competence, right? So when you learn the drill, there's no way of getting around memorization. Memorization is the base, it's the base entry level for any student. You have to memorize the drill. And so memorizing the drill basically gets you to what we call conscious competence, right? So in the 4 stages of competence, we start out with what we call unconscious incompetence. You walk into school, you don't know anything about Sinwali or Toppy, and you're not, you don't know what you don't know. And then you see somebody do it, and you're aware that it exists, but you still don't know how to do it. So we have called that conscious incompetence, right? You know that it exists, but you're not sure how to do it yet. And then you get through memorization, and that gets you to conscious competence. And that basically means that as long as I'm thinking about it, right, as long as I'm thinking about my hands up, I'm stepping off the X, shielding properly, that I'm able to do it. And what happens is I do enough reps like that, that the neural pathways get myelinated, and I get to unconscious competence, which basically means I can perform the maneuvers without thinking about them. And really, that's where we need to be. We need to eventually get to unconscious competence in order to do the things that we're going to talk about today. So what that basically means is this is not a practice video. You're not going to practice along with us. This is going to lay out some strategy for you in some progression in your own training as to where you're going. Okay, before we get into how we want you to practice single Sinawali, we're going to go through some of the theory behind why we want you to do it this way. And that theory has to do with timing and strategy, right? So if Nico was here and he wanted to attack me with a contact weapon, he would know his best strategy for success is to strike me in the head. He would also know that I probably know that I should defend my head. So then his next best strategy is to get me to drop my defenses so that he can attack me in the head. Now, here's what you have to remember about that. He's the aggressor, and action always beats reaction. So that basically means that when he attacks me, his probable baseline strategy is going to be to do something that gets me to drop my guard. And what he would probably do is get me to drop my guard as far away from my head as possible. So that makes a leg attack the most logical thing he can do. So what he's going to do is he's going to attack my leg, right? So you go ahead and swing at my leg, slow. Okay, I'm going to have you swing a backhand using the other hand, a backhand, like this one.
Oh.
So what that would do is he would cause me to have to block that weapon, right? But even if I just stood in place, if I blocked that weapon, strike my leg, right? He could very quickly strike my head from there, right? Okay, so he could follow through that way, or if he stayed with the drill, right, he'd come in and strike with a backhand strike. So demonstrate that. Good, okay. So what that does is it tells me that in addition to having to react to that with strike, I also have to do what we call get off the X. I have to maneuver away from the strike. So as he's striking at me, strike, same strike that we're demonstrating. I'm going to step away from the strike, and also I'm going to take the leg he's targeting and drop that back. Now because he's using an arc to strike, that lateral maneuver gets me out of the way of the arc, right? So the blocking maneuver is just kind of this extra thing, an extra added layer of security for me. So as he strikes at me, I get off the X, and I put what we call a seatbelt in here, which is my blocking maneuver. Okay? And then what happens next depends on the timing, right? So let's say my timing was very early, and he was striking at me. I could get off the exit, and I could have just struck him, right? So that would be, some pretty advanced timing, not advanced as in it's difficult, but advanced as in I'm paying very close attention to what he's doing. When he goes to move, I've gotten off the X, and I've struck him, right? Now, let's say I'm not quite as advanced. I haven't connected with him at that level. Now when he strikes at me, I'm forced to deal with his strike. Right, striking my leg. Right? So I'm forced to deal with his strike. Now at this level, maybe he still hasn't had a chance to catch up in terms of his mind. He's thinking he's going to strike me. He doesn't realize he hasn't hit me yet. And so while he's still here, I've been able to check and counter-strike him. So we'll demonstrate that. So you strike at me. So I'm here, I've checked and counter-struck him. So at that point, right, these are two basic levels of timing in the drill. Now the next thing that can happen is he's more on the ball, and as he strikes me, I've come to here, I've checked, right, but as I'm coming back, he's coming up, right? Does that make sense? And so what we have here is we have half the Sinawali drill, right? And so now we've cleared, and now we're attacking on the other side, right? And then he's checked with the hand, right? And then he's striking the forehand strike. right? And this is the base level Sinawali drill. And so Nico's actually going to go eat his dinner, and Maggie's going to come and we'll demonstrate our way through how we teach that baseline drill.
Thank you guys so much for watching. Bye!
Okay, so as we demonstrated with Nico, or as Nico demonstrated, there's a couple of various timings that can turn the drill into something more that's closer to an application than a drill. What happens in a drill is that we keep the timing very neutral so that both people can stay active in the drill. So the way we'd like to do that, and to have the sequencing correct and to have the strategy valid, Maggie and I will kind of talk and walk our way through it. Right? So I'm going to start by initiating the drill with a backhanded strike at Maggie's leg. She's going to get off the X. She's going to shield, and then we have a little mantra we use. We call it stick to stick, hand to hand. And in these drills, there's basically 3 strike sequences. So we say stick, hand, stick. So she'll drop her shield down. She drops her check hand down. As her check hand comes down, her stick chambers for a backhand strike. Check hand comes back up as she's feeding that next strike. And as that next strike comes in, this is where the drill would have ended. But for the sake, so this would have been her technique that would have ended the drill. But for us to have the drill, what happens is when the strike's coming in, I shield, I have my stick, I have my hand, right? And then my counter strike, which is to the leg on the other side, because I'm trying to get her to drop her defenses. She's got her stick, hand, right? She chambers for a forehand strike, right? She follows up with a stick, right? So right here, this would have ended the drill, but for us to have a neutral timing, I get off the X, shield, stick, hand, stick. And if you notice, this is a backhand strike at the leg, which is where we began, right? So this is how the drill sequences. This is why it initiates with a low strike, so I try to get her to drop her guard. And this is why the low strikes retract, right? Stick, hand, stick. And the high strikes follow through, because the high strikes are where we're trying to apply power, right? So I'm off the X, striking the leg, stick, hand, stick. Right? Stick, hand, stick. Right? So we'll just go through a few sequences like that for you. Stick, hand, stick. So that's our baseline Sinawali drill, okay? And you know, we keep talking about strategy and timing, and so let's go back to our kind of the idea of the basic sequencing, the idea of the basic low initiation to open up the high strike. So I just kind of want to demonstrate some stuff about it. So let's say Maggie's got her guard up, she's protecting her head. Now if I come in and I strike a low strike here, she's forced to react to it. Now let's say you come in here and block it against the flow. Okay, so we've come in here and we've done that. If that was a bait, it wasn't a very committed strike, I can immediately rechamber and attack her in the head, right? So just what that would look like is say guard up, right? Ready position. Okay. So she has to react to the strike, boom, right? And that's where she's getting hit. Okay. So now, as somebody who's maybe seen that strategy, right? So I'll have Maggie demonstrate that, right? So she attacks my leg, I come down, she immediately follows up with my head, right? So as somebody who's seen that strategy, we develop a strategy to counter that. And that counter comes from the fact that in order for them to move from a low strike to a high strike, they have to chamber the strike. So in terms of biomechanics, right, if I come in here and without chambering the strike, they just flip the weapon up, yeah, I mean, this could be a strike, and maybe I'll eventually die from something like that if it was a bladed weapon. But if she struck this way, but I at the same time had this weapon chambered and cut through, right? Obviously, she's going to be on the worse end of that. So to have a decisive strike, she'll have to chamber the weapon, and this is what we call an opportunity in terms of timing, right? So she strikes my leg, right? And when she goes to chamber that strike, chamber the strike. Let's chamber it on the backhand side, right? chamber the backhand strike. So I'm going to come in, and I'm going to check this hand, right? And this is going to be an opportunity for me to end the drill. So I can come in here and end the drill. So just that little sequence would look like, so we have two strategies, right? Let me demonstrate both strategies for you. So one strategy could be, I'm going to stay at long range. I get her to drop her guard, and so I initiate with the low strike, she drops her guard, right? And I follow with the high strike at long range. The second strategy is a counter to that, right? Which is, she initiates at long range, but when she goes to chamber the strike, I go to short range and I close the drill or end the drill with a short range strike, okay? So now, those are two different timings, two different ranges, and when we talk about Sinawali, they're basically come into two different drills, right? So sometimes it's referred to as dog paddle drill. At the academy we call it the entry and exit. There's 4 entry and exits off of each potential strike, so off of the 2 high strikes, off the 2 low strikes. We're just going to talk about one of the entries and exits, maybe 2 of them today, depending on how much time we have. So we already started with the low strike entry exit, so we're going to stay with that one off the backhand. So she feeds me that backhand strike. She goes to chamber the weapon. I'm going to step in, check down, and this would be the butt strike that ends the drill. What we talk about in terms of drilling is we keep the timing somewhat neutral so that the partner can keep up and both of us can be active in the drill. I'm going to segue here for a second and talk about OODA loop, right? So if you're an academy student, you're familiar with the term OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act. It's basically a model for how physical action or physical decisions take place. And basically, it's kind of an enhanced action and reaction model. So in this sequence, or if in this analogy here, we have a backhanded strike followed by an entry and a backhanded strike that's close, right? So we have a long range backhand strike and a close range backhand strike. Okay, so somebody's got to make an adaptation from long range to short range. The next strategy that we're picking up here is she's giving me that long range strike. Not only have I gotten off the X, but as she went to chamber the next strike, I changed the range and I gave her a short range strike. Okay. Now let's say she's got she's had some experience with this strategy, so she's got a counter to it. So she checks my hand and she feeds me because it's most economical because she's already chambered for that backhand strike. She feeds me a backhand strike. So this could be where a drill gets ended, right? So this could be a final sequence if we were talking about a technical application, right? But what we'll do here in the entry and exit drill is when she checks my hand down and she goes to feed me that strike, I'll let my hand come around, chamber as I'm checking her strike, and then I'll attack her from this side, right? And so what we've done in terms of OODA loop is we've started at long range where she gave me a backhand strike, right? When she went to chamber, I changed to short range. I came in from this direction, right? She stayed on that direction, right? So she stayed on this line. I changed to a flank. I changed to the opposite line, which she's got to adjust to, right? And so if she doesn't adjust, she gets struck. Now in the drill, right, remember we keep the timing neutral so that we can drill so both partners can stay active. Her hand comes up and she's able to check this, right? She'll check it with the thumb down because if we check with the thumb up, right, so I want you to hold your arm tense, right? This is the natural way the arm bends. I'm going to take my stick out of Maggie's hand so I don't hurt her, right? But even if she tries to not let me bend my arm or keep my hand straight, when I do this, her hand naturally bends that way because this is the way her elbow is designed to move, right? If she puts her hand this way, right, she can actually prevent me from striking her fairly easily, right? This also opens up a nice path for her to bring her weapon around, chamber it, and this is another place where we can end the sequence, right? So let's get back into this, right? So she feeds me the low strike, which gets me to drop my guard, right? Her goal is to strike me in the head, so she chambers and she should strike me in the head. My strategy then is when she chambers the weapon, right? Strike. I come in here and I check, and I would have ended the drill here, right? Would have ended the technique here. but she's seen this before, so she checks my hand, and we stay on the same path. But as she checks my hand, I suppress the strike, I come around the other way, I'm attacking from the other side, but she has this checked here, comes around, and she's feeding me the strike. So now I have kind of a little bit of a conundrum, because if I come in here and I check this here, we're basically neutral, and I don't want to be neutral, I want to be ahead, so I'm going to get off the X, clear the hand, and as that strike comes in, we're here, and if you notice, this is one of the baseline movements in toppy-toppy that gets us right back into the basic drill sequence, right? So if we go from the drill sequence, right, we're here, right, go nice and slow, right? So let's start from the beginning. Sorry, let's start from the beginning here. I'll give you a leg attack, so defend your leg, right? Hand, head, right? Stick, hand, right? Head, right? Stick, hand, chamber, right? But here I suppress, backhand, she feeds me that backhand, I come in with a forehand, she checks my hand, this comes around, she feeds me the forehand strike, and notice we're right back into the baseline toppy-toppy drill. Okay, staying with the theme of the entries and exits, there's 4 entries and exits. Each one has, so 4 entries and exits off of the 4 strikes in Sinawali or toppy-toppy, the 2 high strikes and the 2 low strikes. Each one actually has a couple entries and exits that you can work, but we're just sticking to the very basic ones and kind of explaining the whys. We're going to stay on the backhand side. We're going to do, we've done the low strike entry exit or a entry exit off the low strike. We're going to do one off the high strike on the backhand side. Before we do that, we're going to do a quick recap of the backhand, the low strike entry exit. So Maggie's basically, she's trying to get me to drop my guard. She's feeding me a low strike to get off the X, right? Her goal is to feed that strike to my head, right? But what you saw that she did is, as she gave me that strike, is that she chambered that weapon. So that's my opportunity to come in here, check this, right? Now it makes the most sense for me to come in and move the unweighted leg, right? Which puts me in this position, which feeds me into a backhand strike, right? Again, as she brings this down, she's also in the very same position. So she feeds me that backhand strike. Now instead of coming back with another backhand sequence, I change the sequence in the OODA loop, and I come with a forehand strike, which she's got to stop because it's the most immediate threat, right? So as she stops this, she spins her hips out and gets her weapon free. I get off the X, get distance, because she's changed this back to a long game, right? So I get this hand clear, and we're back to Sinawali, right? We're here, okay? She comes to the head, so one more time. I've come in 1, 2, 3, 4, right? To the head, once again, right? So that's that sequence. Now let's say what happens is I miss the timing from here where this is chambered, and I was able to exploit that timing to get in here to where she's actually gotten to fire that strike off, right? So now what happens is when that strike comes in, and I'm here, I pass it, and what you notice is I'm in exactly the same position, right? I come in, I give her a backhand strike, she gives me a backhand strike, I give her a forehand strike which she stops, right? We come in, right? And when that backhand strike comes in, I'm here, I give her this backhand strike. Now what you notice she has to do is, in order to stay in the drill, she has to flick this around to give me a backhand strike. Stops this, right? I missed the opportunity for this where I was working the 8 before, so she's firing the strike up. I'm passing this. This is here. 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And that flows right back into the drill. Okay, so the next thing we're going to break down is the 1-2 drill, sometimes called a right-hand drill. We're going to break it down to its components of the attacker role, the defender role, the strategy of what the attacker is trying to achieve, what the strategy of what the defender is trying to achieve, and then we'll put that together with toppy-toppy or Sinawali, and we'll talk about the strategic components of why certain movements are being done at certain times. So the first thing we'll do is we'll start off with the number 1 attack. So Maggie will demonstrate the number 1 attack, right? So she's here, she's trying to apply the strike this way, okay? And so what I'm going to do is, the same basic components we talked about for self-defense. The arc's coming in. I'm going to get off the X, moving away from the arc. I'm going to use our basic mantra of stick to stick, hand to hand. And so as that attack comes in, right, I get off the X, stick to stick, hand to hand, setting the butt strike, and applying the butt strike. Okay? So we'll just demonstrate that one more time. She strikes at me, says here, and I'm applying the butt strike. Okay? So one more time. Okay? Now, let's say I'm going to have Maggie do that defensive component, and I'll do the attack. So as the attacker, I'm going to set the weapon. I'm going to make sure that I'm stepping in so that I can make sure that strike is in the right spot. Right? She's bringing her weapon around, stick to stick, hand to hand, and then if she's not in range for the butt strike, she'll have to shuffle in to make that strike work. Okay? So I'll demonstrate that one more time. Good. And then what we'll do is we'll talk about the two strikes, so the backhand component. So it's the same mantra, it's the same, I'm going to get off the X, I'm going to put up my stick, so it's a vertical shield, stick to stick, hand to hand, and this time my counter strike is a 1. Okay? So just demonstrating that, she gives me the 2, stick to stick, hand to hand, forehand strike. Okay, one more time. Now, I'll have Maggie demonstrate that same component. So I'm giving Maggie the 2. Now when I do that, there's two schools of thought on this, right? So generally speaking, when we start out, we talk about developing maximum power. So on a forehand strike, what I'd like to do is just hang tight for a second, Max. I'd like to step in on a forehand strike so that when I turn, that my strike has body behind it the whole way. So what I'd like to also do on a backhand strike is turn similarly. So I'd like to step this way and turn through the strike. Now, what I am giving up for that is, if I could throw the strike short, I would have range. But what I sacrifice for the range here is I sacrifice the power I would gain this way, right? So you're gonna work the drill both ways eventually, but at a beginning level, what I like to see is I like to see people throw the strike long, which basically means if the stick is in my right hand, I'm going to step forward with my left foot, and I'm going to step forward so that the center of my hips are on the target line, so that when I turn, right, I'm coming through the target line. So now what Maggie can do is she can get off the X, put up a vertical shield, stick to stick, hand to hand, right? She sets the weapon, turns her hips in the forehand strike, right? Or she can step in if she wasn't close enough, and then deliver the strike that way. I'll have her do that one more time. Show you right here. Good. Okay. And so those are your basic attack and defense components of the 1-2 drill or the right hand drill. So I'm sure this is a review for most of you, but if somebody's learning the drill off this video, that's all the pieces that are in this drill, other than one transition piece that we'll get into right now. So now we'll talk about the strategy of the attacker, right? So why is there a drill that does this to begin with? Okay. Well, one of the things is that this drill capitalizes on one of the weaknesses of human anatomy, which is that the human anatomy is designed to deliver power or keep its attention primarily in one direction. So when I give Maggie, say, the 1 strike, and she directs her efforts at that, right? So I give her the 1 strike, she gets off the X, stick to stick, hand to hand, she delivers the counter strike. Where she's open right now is from this side. So if this drill is teaching me is that while she's dealing with this forehand strike, I could have brought the weapon around, got off the X, and delivered this backhand strike, right? So if we were doing a drill specifically for the role of the attacker, it might look something like this. I feed her the strike, and as she's dealing with her options here, I've gotten off the X, and I'm feeding her the counter strike, right? Okay. So that's one level of the drill. Now, you notice in order to do that, when I gave her the 1 strike, and she checked, I had to check her butt strike here, right? And as I checked her butt strike, I also brought this to a tip back position. I brought my weapon to a tip back position for a backhand strike. Now, if you have done this drill before, you're already familiar with the fact that the 2 strike can be substituted for 7. So 2s and 7s are interchangeable, right? So here's a 7. I could have countered this way, right? Here's a 2. I could have countered that way. Here I'm throwing the strike short, but I could have also maneuvered to throw the strike long. I could have maneuvered to throw the 7 long, and it's been more consistent with our platform with max power. So that's, say, the drill for the attacker. Now, what the defender can do, or what the defender has to do now, is I'm going to have Maggie do the attacker component of the drill. So she feeds me the 1, I've gotten to here, and she immediately checks my hand and brings the weapon around and attacks from the other side, right? So what I'm having to learn how to do now is compensate for how quickly she can make up this, she can cover this distance. I have to make up that distance and also reorient my body, so there we go, right? And reorient my body towards the attack, okay? So how do I do that? Well, one of the things is that my head has to stay in the direction of travel, right? So if I want to maneuver off the X, I keep my head in the direction of travel, right? Which it should be anyway, because as she's giving me the 1 strike, let me feed me the 1, right? And I've gotten to here and I've given her the butt strike, right? My head's already facing this direction of travel, which is why when she brings the stick around, that I'm open on this side is because my head's already looking this way. So instead of looking at that as a weakness and trying to turn and get my weapon up, where she's covering that and now she's basically forcing me out of center, forcing me out of my space here, all I'm going to do is I'm going to maneuver, move my unweighted leg here, and I'm going to pivot, right? So as she's covering this distance, she's checking, right, bringing the weapon around. I've maneuvered, covered that distance, stick to stick, hand to hand, and now when I feed her the forehand strike back, here's where the drill's reversed, right? So now I am the attacker. Step off the X. And you can see if you're working this drill with somebody who's learning it, maybe you're in quarantine, you're working with a family member, you can see that I'm helping my partner by putting their hands in the right position, right? So that's the idea behind the 1-2 drill. And we've covered basically the strategy of why you do it, right? So why do I get somebody to look one way? Because it leaves them open on the other side. We've covered the way to move through that reactionary gap by keeping your head focusing in the direction of travel and moving the unweighted leg. And then what we'll do is we'll put this together with toppy-toppy. Maybe 1 or 2 other points on this as long as we're talking about it. Ones, we touched on it before, the 2s can be substituted for 7s and vice versa, but 1s can also be substituted for 6s. So let's say, going back to the original technique, right? If I gave Maggie a 1, she just did the defensive component, so she gets off the X, stick hand counter strike. She can do exactly the same technique against a 6, right? So I come in here and I've done a 6 strike, right? She can do exactly the same thing. If I give her the number 2 and she does the defensive component, gets off the X, stick to stick, hand in hand, no, the other way. Okay. Then she can do exactly the same thing against a 7. Okay? And the drill works. And so let's do that one more time. And then the drill works the same way, so I could give her a 1, she comes in here, I give her a 7, she deals with that, right? She can come in here and she can give me a 7, right? I can deal with that. I can come in here, instead of giving her a 1, I could have come in and given her a 6. She gets off the X the other way. Stick hand in, right? Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put the 1-2 drill, set an exit in the toppy. But instead of just doing it, instead of having a cool drill to do for its own sake, let's talk about why we would do that. So let's start with the idea of she feeds me a backhand strike, right? So I get off the X, stick to stick, hand to hand, and in the 1-2 drill, I'm either coming back with a 1 or I'm coming back with a 6, and she's reacting to it this way, right? So let's just call that forehand response that's high, right? It's somewhere in the upper quadrant of her body. So she gives me a 2. So I can come in here, and right now I can see that even if whatever strike I throw, she's prepped for it, right? Maybe she won't get out of the way, but I can tell by where her weight is and everything like that she's going to be able to get off the X and avoid that. So instead of coming in high, I might attack low, right? So I come in low, she gets off the X, and comes around with strike this way. Well, then you can see her initial reaction was to actually go the wrong way, and which would have gotten her hit. So this takes some training to come around this way. And you can see that once I catch this here, right, we talked in toppy about the idea that the low strikes reverse, because what I've gotten her to do is I've gotten her to drop her guard to get everything down. So this is a with control strike on my part, so that I can come back through with a power strike, right? So let's just talk our way through that. She gives me a backhand strike, right? Here I give her a forehand strike, but I make it low. She reacts to that. Boom, right? So therein is an exit to toppy. So we're going to talk about that first, and then we're going to get into. So that's the why, and then we'll talk about how we get into it and how to drill it. So here's how we get into it. Maggie gives me a 1. Okay. And usually the way we work it is we say both people get a repetition of the standard drill. So off the X, stick to stick, hand to hand, butt strike. She brings the 2 around. I'm off the X, stick to stick, hand to hand, forehand strike. Now this is the first time I'm finishing up my role as the attacker. She's beginning her role as the defender. Right? Now she's going to feed me the 9. I'll get off the X, and we're into toppy here. Okay? And then the next time we get into it, I can say, okay, Maggie, the next time I see a 1, I'm going to treat it like an entry to the toppy drill, or to the 1-2 drill. So we're here, stick to stick, hand to hand. Okay. We'll just go back. So the next time I see a 1, I treat it like an entry to here. She gives me a 2, block. I come back over here, she gives me the 9. Okay. So there's basically 3 primary exit and entry points from the 1-2 drill, or I should say 3 primary exit points from the 1-2 drill back to toppy that we'll use at a base level. So we've already covered the forehand strike, which we replaced the 1 or the 6. We replaced that with a 9, which took us to the toppy or Sinawali drill. The next one we'll talk about it as the really what we would say is the only striking response the defender has in the drill, right? So if Maggie feeds me a 1, she's the attacker, I'm the defender, I'm off the X, stick to stick, hand to hand. Normally, in the base drill, I'm feeding her a butt strike, and she's checking that, and she's coming back around with a 2 strike, and so the drill looks like this. But this time when she feeds me a 1, what happens is I come around here, and instead of giving her a butt strike, I give her a low strike, okay? And my goal with that low strike is to either strike her with it and she gets hit, and then I follow up, or she reacts to it by coming around and I follow up with the high strike. So that's, in terms of strategy, what am I trying to do on this exit? Well, I'm trying to do the same thing. I'm trying to get her to remember how we started this whole discussion out with toppy, the idea that I'm aware of that the most effective strikes I can launch her against her head, and in terms of stopping the fight, she's also aware of that. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get her to not guard her head or leave her head open for a moment. So it's the same idea. So these exits, as opposed to just being random exits, to kind of build in, mathematical equations of high and low in a drill, there's a strategy behind them. And the strategy here is that she's given me a 1, and I've come in here, and I couldn't attack the head this way, maybe because of distance or because of time, so I chose to come in low so to get her to leave the head open, right? And then obviously in the drill what happens is she's able to catch up, and that takes us back into toppy-toppy. So let me kind of show you the technique exit, right? So she gives me the 1, and we go stick to stick, hand to hand, and then follow with an 8 strike, right? Now, what we'll do with her is we'll let her catch up and counter that. But remember, the low strikes in toppy-toppy are with control, and the high strikes are without control, right? So one more time. So we're here, she strikes, I feed, she reacts, and I follow through, okay? So that's the base exit on what would have been the backhanded butt strike, okay? The way that's gonna look in the drill is this, right? So we might just, in terms of practice with your partner, and like I said, we're making these, we're making this class during the quarantine, so you might be working with somebody who's just learning the drill. Maggie's done a great job in the last couple days of learning a ton of material and trying to put it together for me, so we can deliver this to the students. But a way to practice this is, instead of starting in toppy-toppy, we might start in a technique of the right hand drill. So maybe I feed Maggie a 1, and she comes in, and instead of giving me the butt strike, she gives me the low strike. I've checked her hand, I've moved to a tip back position. Now here's a couple of important things. I'm going to replace my check hand with the stick as she's striking my leg, right? So she strikes my leg, this is here, she sees the opening, strikes my head, I come in, and now we are back in toppy-toppy. So now that can get us to toppy-toppy, and let's go slow legs, right? And so the next thing we can do is I can say, okay, the next time I see a 1 strike, I'm gonna make an entry that resembles the 1-2 drill. So here, this entry resembles the 1-2 drill. But instead of going into the 1-2 drill, we can kind of drill this exit. So I can feed her the 8 back, she can get off the X, strike here, strike my head, and we can go back in the toppy-toppy drill, which takes like 4 minutes. And then she can say, hey, the next time she sees a 1 strike, so let's say here's a 1 coming up, she steps in, checks, stick to stick, hand to hand, she feeds me the low strike, and so we can kind of work like that. Now I want to hit on a point here real quick about keeping my check hand in play. So let's say she comes in here on this 1, right, checks, low strike, she feeds the high strike, but I can come in and check, and now we have, check this, backhand, we have some hybrid of, check my hand up, some hybrid of an exit off of Sinawali, right? Or a number of different things that can happen. But anyway, I want to get used to keeping my check hand in play, getting used to block, right? I might come in here, give me 1. So I might come in here, and she checks my hand, right? And as she gets off the X, and she goes to tip back position, that she's going to replace her hand and the stick, but see how her hand's up and ready to go, because in terms of timing, right, if she's way ahead of me, then maybe she'll just come in and strike me, but if we're kind of at the same time, then she can check my hand, step in, and butt strike me, right? Make sense? So that way, she's got that option in terms of timing available to her. The last basic exit from the 1-2 drill or the right hand drill back to toppy-toppy, we'll use the backhand movement on the attacker's part. So when the attacker throws a 1, and then they come back through and they throw a 2, we'll make that 2 a low strike, so we'll make it an 8, and that'll take us back into tapi-tapi or sinawali. Now, let's go through again the idea of why somebody would be doing that, other than just some sort of mathematical equation or variable that we're checking in a drill sequence, right? So let's say, again, the whole idea behind tapi-tapi was this, right? So let's say Maggie gave me a 1, so she'll be in the attacker role. She gives me the 1, and she's gotten me to turn all my attention over here, right? Now, normally, I'd be coming in here and I'd be giving her a butt strike. Let's say her whole intention was to, let's take a break for a second, right? Let's say one of the things she understood was that she knew that she wanted to attack me in the head or strike my head to end the fight as quickly as possible. And she also knew that if she had the option of striking the front of my head or the back of my head, it was probably preferable in terms of efficiency and effectiveness to strike me in the back of the head. So her whole strategy is built around the idea of getting me to drop my guard and then optimally strike me in the back of the head, right? So the way she achieves that is she gives me an obvious strike that she knows that I'm going to be able to defend, but I'm going to direct my defenses against. So she gives me that 1 strike to get off the exit, direct my defenses against that, but she's anticipated it. So before I even throw the butt strike, she checks my elbow, comes back down low, strikes me low, and then follows up high. Let's do that one more time. Okay? So she gives me the 1 strike, right? She checks my elbow, comes down low, strikes me low, follows up high. Let's do that one more time. Right? So she gives me a 1 strike, right? She checks my elbow, comes down low, right? Follows up, right? So, and I'll demonstrate that same thing. So let's say I've gotten her to direct all her attention one way, right? I've checked her arm, come around here, I've struck her low, and then followed up by striking her high, right? So that's kind of maybe the strategy that exit's trying to employ, okay? And so the way we'll work that is we'll start it by working it in the 1-2 drill. So let's just say we'll do a rep of the 1-2 drill. Actually, you know what? Maybe the way to practice this is to practice it by itself first. So let's say I initially give her the 1, she does the off the X, sticks hand to hand, she gives me a butt strike, and I've maneuvered here, right? And I'm striking the low, but what she does to stay in the drill is she orients, takes that low strike, right? And then we're back into tapi-tapi, right? Okay. Now the next way I can practice this is I can look for a 1 strike, and I can come in and butt strike, but she gives me a low strike, right? And we come back into tapi-tapi, right? And the next time she sees a 1 strike, she can come in, right? So here's a 1 strike, Mag, right? And I can come across, right? And we can work in this, right? The next time you need to slow down, Mags. So I come in here, boom, we've come across a low strike, high strike. Okay. And the next time you see a 1, just right here, stiff hand, right? Low strike, high strike. Okay. Now let's look at a couple different things, right? So let's say we took this point here, Mags comes around, right? And she's feeding a low strike. Well, if I respond with a low strike here, right? This takes us back into tapi-tapi, obviously. She could have given me a high strike, right? That high strike could likewise take us back into tapi-tapi if I wanted to. Maybe we'll just demonstrate that one time. So let's say you give me a 1 strike. So we come in here, right? She comes around, but instead of giving me the low strike, she gives me the high strike, but I just pass it this way and take it into tapi-tapi. So that's another exit I can do, whether she gives me a low or a high. But we would call that an exit that the defender's doing as opposed to the attacker, right? So remember, the attacker role is he feeds a 1, comes back around, feeds you a 2. So if he does the exit or the transition, we're calling that the exits that he's initiating. So there's initiations that can be done on the defender's part as well, but we're not focusing on those so much. So what we've covered so far in tapi-tapi on the exits or we've covered an exit off of, let's say, give me a 1, right? And we'll go through a cycle here. So we're here, you give me a 2. Okay. So now, instead of me giving her a 1 back, I could have given her a 9 back. So that was the first exit. But let's say I gave her a 1 and she came here, stick hand, right? And let's say instead of giving me the butt strike, she gave me a low strike. Well, then that was a different exit, right? That was an exit on her part. But let's say we came here and she'd given me the butt strike, and instead of me giving her a backhand strike high, I gave her a backhand strike low. That's the third exit we worked on, right? So we've covered 3 exits back into toppy-toppy, okay? Okay, group, so we've covered a lot of things about partner drills, but some of you might be in a situation where you have to do solo practice. So I'm going to touch on a couple things about solo practice with these things, with the things we've covered today, and a couple ways of practicing solo. One of the things that's beneficial about seeing the partner practice is you understand why, especially the strategy is really important to say, okay, you know, not just memorization, although memorization is key. There's no way to getting around the fact that your baseline is you have to memorize these drills. But once you memorize the movements, then you start saying, okay, well, why am I doing this? Because once you understand why, the how becomes much more clear, okay? I'm trying to do this particular thing. I'm trying to accelerate my OODA loop. I'm trying to, you know, get them to look this way so I can move that way. Those strategies become more clear, and then you have a clearer understanding of how to do that when you're understanding why you're doing something. So let's start back with the idea of where we began with a low strike and toppy-toppy, and we spent some time covering an 8 strike, so we'll stay with that. So I'm going to visualize a partner in front of me, and I'm going to visualize an 8 strike coming in towards my leg. And so the first drill I would do as a solo drill in terms of timing is, I would say that I have the best timing possible, which is as soon as they start to move, I'm going to move off the X, right? I'm going to change my weapon, but instead of even dealing with their strike, I'm going to be so far ahead in timing that I'm going to be right here and I'm going to be striking them in the head, right? And so that would be the first drill practice. Now that drill probably looks like if you were practicing your 12 strikes, that you're basically just doing a number 2 strike, right? But it's the same idea, right? There's no way around memorization for the drills, and when you're talking about application, there's no way around having to visualize what your opponent's doing, right? So here I am. I have good situational awareness. I'm picking up quickly on the fact that I'm being attacked with a backhand movement. I'm moving off the X, and I'm striking, right? And then I'm back. So that's the idea behind that. Then I can say, okay, let's say my timing's not quite as good, right? So now I'm having to deal with the strike, but I'm not having to deal with much of the power of the strike. So what happens there is I get off the X. I've dealt with the strike by getting off the X. I've put up a shield. There's not much more coming in from there. And so I'm immediately with control and then striking the head of the bad guy, right? Now, the next drill I would practice is maybe there's some more power that I felt. So I get off the X, I strike. I've had to check the hand, right, to deal with any excess power coming in. And now, boom, I'm striking the head. So already in those first movements, we've had 3 different specific timings that we can practice, right? So just to recap those initial timings, we could say my situational awareness is very high, I'm very engaged. I see movement, I get off the X, boom, no need to even deal with the attack. Next thing was I'm being attacked, but I get off the X enough time that I'm not really feeling much of the power. Boom, didn't even need to use my check hand. Now I'm feeling power, here's my check hands to deal with that. Bam, now I'm going to deal with the attacker that way. So, so we've dealt with kind of those 3 things. Now, let's say we can work those same 3 things on the other side, right? In terms of working off the 9, I'll let you guys extrapolate that out. Let's stay on this scene though. So let's say when I felt that power, right? I'm even a little bit further behind in timing. So the ability for me to get in here and strike, my bad guy's already a little bit ahead of me, so as his weapon's coming up the chamber, I'm checking his hand, and that puts me at close contact range, and now I'm butt striking him. So that drill would look something like this, right? A little bit behind, check, hit, butt strike, okay? Now, we can say the bad guy gets a little smarter, right? So instead of getting struck with that butt strike, he checks my hand down, right? So he checks my hand, so I've attacked him once from this side, now I'm attacking him once from this side, right? My whole idea there is not any different than the 1-2 drill. I attacked him from one side, I got him to put his attention that way, and now I'm coming around from the other side, right? So he's going to have to do a lot of maneuvering. He's going to have to, one, be situationally aware, and two, do a lot of maneuvering to catch up, right? And so you can see that that gets us into an entry and exit, right? So let's just kind of recap that. They give you the attack, I'm off the X, right? Felt power. I'm also feeling them getting ahead of me. So I'm coming in, striking, they've checked my hand, right? I've come around. Now, they might have fed me a strike, so I might be checking their hand down, and I'm coming in here. And in the drill, what happens is, they check my hand here, and then they're feeding me a 1, I'm clearing their hand off, and this takes us back into toppy-toppy. But what I'm going to tell you is, there's two main components when we're doing drilling, especially when we're doing partner drilling. And what we need to do is we need to understand that there's two ways of thinking about timing, let's say. In one sense, or on one side, we're looking for recognizing and or creating opportunities, right? So we would say we're basically initiating things on time, right? Initiating various timings. And then we would put those into what we would call the attacker role in the drill, right? So I'm recognizing places where I can do things, and I recognize an opportunity is about to present itself or is presenting itself, and I'm putting myself into those positions. And then the secondary timing is what we would call flow. I don't want to call it reaction. I want to basically call it adaptation, right? So in a drill sequence, you might have one person who's initiating various changes from drill to drill or sequence to sequence by recognizing timing and opportunity of saying initiating an entry or an exit, or a transition from, say, the toppy-toppy drill to the 1-2 drill, and vice versa. As just a couple examples, the other person who's not initiating those drills is basically responding to and flowing, right? And both these timings are very important for the application environment, right? Obviously, if you are in response or in reaction, we need to be able to flow without getting kind of caught up or attaching to what we think should have happened, but being able to be present in the moment and flow with what is happening. On the other side, you know, if we do need to defend ourselves and we are situationally aware, and there are things that are advantages we can stack in our favor, we would like to be proactive and look for, recognize, and or create those opportunities to end that confrontation more quickly than otherwise, right? When we talk about, you know, combat is a toxic, corrosive environment, and the longer you're in it, the longer time is working against you, right? So let's kind of go back to this idea we're working on in terms of the entry and exit. So in the toppy-toppy drill, the way we normally work it is we normally work it in kind of a give and take flow, where I come in, I've stepped in, checked their hand on the way to say the 2, fed them the butt strike, they check my hand down, they're feeding me a backhand butt strike, I'm coming around the forehand butt strike, they check my hand, and when they check my hand, their weapon is free and coming at me, and I'm stepping off the X. So basically, in this last piece, we'll call it defensive because I'm getting off the X. Their weapon is, all things being equal, is moving to target while mine is tied up and mine's getting free and it's moving to shield. But let's change the way that drill feels, especially with solo practice. One of the reasons we do that with partner practice is it keeps the drill a little safer. But with solo practice, I can say I'm going to keep initiating those timings, right? So I can come in off here, I can initiate this entry, right? When they check backhanded here, I can initiate this movement to the opposite side from the backhand to the forehand side. And as soon as they check my hand, I can give here and I can initiate a change from short range to long range. So what I've really done here in terms of the OODA loop, in terms of creating action-reaction, an action-reaction gap and advantage, is I've gone from changing range to changing sides to changing range again, which really forces the bad guy to have a high level of situational awareness and a high level of skill to keep up with all those changes. So let's look at that real quick. We said the attack comes in, off the X, I've dealt with the leg strike. They're on their way to strike a backhand. So I've initiated a change from long range to short range here, right? And I'm initiating it on the backhand side. They've dealt with that, so I've changed to the forehand side, and now I've changed back to a long range, right? So there's another way to practice that drill. So just right now, we have 4 different timing pieces that we've worked. We've worked a pure initiation off a backhand, right? We've worked a little bit later timing, but not so late that I've had to really deal with the power, right? When I've come off the backhand side, I've dealt with a little bit later timing where I'm here, but I'm in a give and take flow situation, right? And now what we're saying is we're in, let's say, that same drill sequence, but we're entirely on the give side, right? I'm giving all the timing changes, right? So I'm here, I've given this change, I've given this change, and I've given this change, right? So those are a couple different ways of thinking about that, that piece. You can extrapolate that to almost all the things we've worked on, and demonstrated here in this video. As this quarantine goes on, and we're not really sure necessarily when it's going to end, I'd encourage everybody to keep up with their solo practice. And then, this is a time where you can take things that we already know, and hopefully most of you guys already know the drills we've worked on today, and kind of take a deeper dive into them. Remember that, what you're looking for every day is to just kind of make an incremental improvement. I know people have talked about, they don't have access to the dojo, they don't have access to a gym, things that are limiting your training. Remember, part of what we do is we stay adaptive, and we do what we can with what we have, right? So we're looking to do what you can with what you have, make an incremental improvement every day. If you can, enlist a family member or somebody who you're spending time with, and teach them some of what we're doing. My wife picked up a lot of this stuff, a lot of these drills very quickly, and hopefully you got to see a little bit of how you as the person with more knowledge can initiate and maneuver your partner's hands around, keep everything very slow. Remember, in order to get all the right components into what we're looking for in terms of efficiency and effectiveness, is what we're trying to do is we need to slow down so that we can expand time, so that we can control it, and once we expand time, we can insert the pieces that we want, remove what we don't want, and then through repetition, that time compresses again, right? And that's kind of the secret to getting good quality skills developed in a reliable fashion, right? If you don't do that, if you don't control time, then you increase the randomization between repetitions, right? So this rep was right, that rep was wrong, and you're not getting good, consistent practice. Other than that, you guys stay safe out there, keep checking in with us. We're going to build our next training video on top of what we've done here. So watch this. If you have questions, reach out to me or any of the other academy teachers, either Colorado Academy, Midwest Academy, or any of the sister affiliate schools. And let us know what your questions, concerns, and thoughts are. Take care.